So Andrei is in Ukraine. So we have illustrated in one audiovisual product, one video. It was the case of Slavutic, which is the city of the workers of Chernobyl, very close to the Belarusian border. So in the mid, more or less in mid-March, there was the invasion of the city, and there was a huge reaction from the civil society, by local residents, that they confronted the Russian soldiers and the military machinery, and they confronted this aggression by demonstrating, organizing a huge demonstration that they, basically confront the soldiers. This huge and massive response was able to create a force to enter into negotiations with the Russian soldiers to leave the city into cities. This is, of course, is one of the successful stories, and we have also dramatic situations like, as you know, the massacres in Irpin or Bucha, but there are also other cases that they were not basically covered in the media or in other channels. But we have many actions where it was possible to use nonviolence as a way to enter into negotiations and into basically dialogue with the Russian soldiers. And finally, the last component I want to highlight is that the nonviolence action in the country is of course, articulated with community organizing. And we have the massive participation of youth through voluntary networks, youth centers. We have also the expressions of hybrid self-organized groups, which is between professional activists and ordinary citizens, that they were able to basically to provide urgent support to the local populations. I think this is specific, self-organized groups, in my opinion, we need to understand as schools of activism and social transformation, where ordinary people learn how to take decisions, plan, how to tackle social issues. And I think this dynamic of cooperation between local authorities and grassroots organizations, for example, we have cases in Sumy, in the northern regions, where grassroots organizations, they were explained to us that during the siege of the city, they were leading the humanitarian support, they were leading the resilience of the communities, and this increased their legitimacy and also their capacity to engage in more effective cooperation with local authorities. So these processes, these phenomena, are very important in order to understand the development of local governments in the country, which is lead, in terms of cooperation between local administration and other local actors. And I think this element is very important, and is, let's say, is really essential for the political reforms that started in the country after 2014, and which are connected with the decentralization process. So just to finalize, I would like to define three elements, for later for the discussion, that I think that is essential to advance on the support of nonviolent resistance in other occupied areas like Crimea. I think it's important as well to visualize and to explain the impact of nonviolence, not only Ukraine but also worldwide, and to show the effectiveness in different stages of the invasion. I think in this level also it's very important to advance and to increase protection of nonviolent activists. And as I mentioned before, Crimea, but also Donetsk and Luhansk, where there are also activists working and confronting the occupation. And finally, I think we need to also to explore the possibilities to engage with anti-war activists from Belarus and Russia, which are also confronting their authoritarian regimes inside the country, but also outside of their countries. There are ongoing exchanges of cooperation already in the Baltic countries and also South Caucasus, as well in Central Europe. I think there are opportunities of also to engage at this level with nonviolent activists. And because in my opinion, I think that also the future of the region depends also on the capacity to affect the pillars of power of the authoritarian regimes in Russia and Belarus. I will stop here, so we have also space for later for discussion, and so we'll give the space to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippe, for this very much overarching and at the same time brief presentation of your research work on the nonviolent resistance in Ukraine. Something that you touched upon that I think it's very clear for people that are working with Ukrainian activists and on the humanitarian response to Ukraine as well, is how important are the informal networks that you mentioned, and how the citizens were able to very fastly organize themselves, not only on the side of the civil resistance, but also for the humanitarian response. And I thought that was very insightful that you presented also historical reasons why in the region the informal networks tend to form and tend to work very well. I also found curious in my work in Ukraine that a lot of them don't get institutionalized, especially on the humanitarian work. I thought some of them do. Others choose not to get institutionalized, and I think that's very curious, and how important they have been, not only for the organization of the humanitarian response, but as you mentioned, in terms of providing protection to the activists and access to justice. Thank you very much. Now we'll follow to our next speaker. Let me, yes, I can see him here. We have Andrei Kamenchikov from Nonviolence International. He's a nonviolence expert at the Peace Support Ukraine project as well. And he wrote a report that is also under extension on the nonviolent civil resistance in Ukraine in the face of the Russian occupation. So please, Andrei, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I would like to say that I hope everything's all right. I'm sitting in Kiev right now. We have no electricity, but I have installed a kind of battery pack that provides me some some additional power, and our internet provider did a similar system. So I hope we will have enough power to last through the seminar, but you never know. Now, in terms of nonviolent resistance and the current situation with, obviously, nonviolent resistance played a major role and is continuing to play a major role in this war, but a role that is often not properly recognized by neither the Ukrainian society nor by the international community. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the Russian leadership was under a certain misconception that it basically what the Kremlin believed its own propaganda, and its own propaganda was trying to explain to most people in Russia that Ukrainians are basically a branch of the more general Russian ethnic group, and that they may have been under bad influence, Western influence, but basically that they're very similar, and in that sense, that the majority of Ukrainians won't see a problem switching their identity to some extent, or finding an alliance with the invading Russian force. The whole concept was that the majority of the Ukrainian population would either be neutral or maybe even support, at least a significant part of the population would support the Russian invasion, especially in the predominantly Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine, which are the eastern and southern areas of the country. And just to give you one example of how this idea played out in reality, during the first days of the invasion, and some of the military vehicles that were destroyed or captured by Ukrainian forces, what they found was not as much military, not armament, not weapons for military action, but police gear, clubs, tear gas, and things like that. Obviously, the Russian leadership did expect a resistance, but was more hoping that, these would be mainly, small pockets of resistance that they could deal with using their typical repressive methods, and that the majority of the population would be either neutral or a significant proportion of them would welcome Russian troops. This was the whole the whole base that the whole Russian plan of attack was developed upon. Because, to be honest, from a purely military point of view, it really didn't make much sense attacking a country as large as Ukraine from very many different directions with a force that, at least in numbers, was actually smaller than the number of the resisting forces in the Ukrainian armed, in the Ukrainian military, not even speaking about the Territorial Guard and other Ukrainian units that also participate in the resistance. So from a purely military point of view, this attack was largely doomed from the beginning. However, the reason why such a weird move was made by Moscow is because they really didn't understand what Ukraine really is, and they didn't understand the willingness of Ukrainian people to resist. And that included not just armed resistance. That included basically their whole plan, their long-term plan was to basically turn Ukraine, well, probably annex the eastern regions of Ukraine, but then turn the rest of the country into kind of a satellite state, maybe without some Western provinces that they would likely be willing to negotiate their future with other European countries about. But this concept was only possible based on this idea that the majority of the Ukrainian population will be complicit with what Russia is doing. And in fact, that was a complete failure from the very beginning. And what that meant is that in the first weeks of the invasion, before most people even realized the military, the fact that militarily this was a absolutely insane move and that they didn't have the military capacity to win this war. Before even that, they ran into this reality that their whole long-term planning that was based on the idea that they could get the cooperation from the majority of ordinary Ukrainians, that their long-term plan has failed completely. And they had to improvise since then, both in their military action and in their political approach toward Ukraine. And that's what they've been doing since, improvising. And they constantly change their plans. They constantly change their justification for the war. They constantly change basically everything. I'm sure that the only goal today, the only realistic goal today that Putin and his close circle in the Kremlin has is to try to find a way out of this mess that would save them their face. It wouldn't be seen in Russian society itself as a complete failure. Now, in terms of the practical aspects of nonviolent resistance, Philip did a great report that basically reflected the first few months of Russia's invasion. And it reflected many very vivid examples of massive civil nonviolent resistance, like the case in the town of Slavuchich that Filipa mentioned. But there were similar cases, very, very many, almost all towns and villages in Ukraine to greater or lesser extent. However, it should be recognized that after the Russian leadership realized that their whole concept of the loyal attitude of the majority of Ukrainians toward Russia has failed, they changed their approaches as well, and they began a very severe campaign of repressions against anyone in occupied territories that was able to openly, or even maybe not so openly, maybe symbolically, demonstrate their Ukrainian identity, demonstrate their resistance, and so forth. And we know today, after certain parts of Ukraine have been liberated, that this was a really campaign of terror, where people were killed, people were tortured, people were kidnapped, and so forth. And in this kind of situation, the traditional nonviolent types of nonviolent resistance that people in Ukraine were used to, like demonstrations, and demonstrating Ukrainian symbols and things like that, they can backfire because it exposes people. It exposes people with a strong Ukrainian identity, and what the Russians did is they took videos, demonstrations, and that allowed them then to locate many of the people that they saw as not being loyal to the new to them and to the new authorities that they were trying to install in the occupied territory. So this created a situation where many people who were able to avoid captivity had to leave, or basically had to leave to liberate areas of Ukraine, or to areas of Ukraine that were not under Russian control. And the people that remained in occupied areas were in the situation where they had to find other ways of resistance. So, for example, this yellow ribbon movement developed, where people would use very, very subtle signs, but still would demonstrate their Ukrainian identity, or where people would spread leaflets, in the night, or take certain action where the identity of those who are involved in this or that action are not is not disclosed, or is hard to locate. Also, a very important area where nonviolent resistance is continuing to this day is the field of education. It's important to mention that very soon after taking physical control of certain areas, one of the first things that the Russian authorities have done is they tried to influence the education system. And for example, during the summer, they spent lots of effort to so-called retrain Ukrainian teachers. They offered them very good deals, for vacations, or spending a few weeks in five-star hotels on the Black Sea, and very very good conditions, but under the pretext that they would get retraining in relevant Russian institutions. And what's interesting, it's not just teachers of like humanities, history or literature, that were involved in this, but also teachers in math teachers, teachers of science, and so forth. Subjects that you wouldn't think have much of a ideological impact on children, but nonetheless, they still were also uh, the Russian authorities were trying to involve these teachers as well. And nonetheless, in most cases, the majority of the teachers or professors at higher educational institutions have not cooperated, or not cooperated as the Russians expected. For example, in the city of Melitopol, one of the larger cities that was occupied by Russian troops, all school directors refused to cooperate, and as I know, up to today, I think all of them, or at least almost all of them, have left the region to areas of Ukraine that are not under occupation. And today, they are trying to, whatever, by whatever means they have to offer to provide to the students who remain in occupied territories, provide these children and these students with opportunity to continue education in Ukrainian, along Ukrainian standards. And sometimes when there's a level of internet communication that can enable online learning, in many areas that's not possible, but then there are ways that they're trying to find ways to still provide children and students in these areas with relevant educational materials, Ukrainian educational materials. And this is one of the front lines of nonviolent resistance today. Another area is trying to provide at least some assistance, humanitarian assistance, even if it's just like direct humanitarian assistance, like providing medical assistance to people in occupied territories. One of the problems that people face is that the people, especially with health conditions that require certain types of medicines, they do not have access to these medicines today very often in occupied territories. And while there often is access to other types of, similar types of medicines that are used in Russia, there are problems with that as well because of the different doses, the certain the quality of Russian-made medication is often not very good, or might have allergic reactions and so forth. So that's another issue where our organizations that we know today, they're providing people in at least some of the occupied territories with help with medication. But this is not just a humanitarian action, it's also very important in terms of demonstrating that Ukraine still cares, that Ukrainian society still tries to do whatever it can to help people who are under foreign occupation right now. And so while this might seem like just a simple humanitarian action, it's much more than that. It's actually also a very important aspect of nonviolent resistance. Nonviolent resistance is actually a very wide, includes a very wide spectrum of potential activities that, and of course that depends on the local context. Another area is very symbolic activities. New symbols, like, rather than using the blue, yellow colors of the Ukrainian flag, people just use a yellow, there's this yellow ribbon movement. But it's also something that allows, so people are coming up with new kinds of ways of expressing their Ukrainian identity. It's very important that these samples of expressing Ukrainian identity still continue in occupied territories. Today, the tide of war has changed quite dramatically. The largest city and the only regional center that Russia was able to occupy since February 24th, the city of Kherson, has been liberated a month and a half ago. Significant parts of most of the occupied areas in the Kharkiv region have been liberated, and some other areas as well. We do not know what the future holds, but as things look today, that there will be more and more liberated areas in Ukraine. And of course, that work in these areas is also a very challenging issue, because people that have been exposed to Russian physical presence and threats and Russian propaganda and so forth today are very worried about how they will be seen in what the attitude will be toward them by the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian society. And Russia is speculating on that. It's trying to spread rumors about all kinds of, threats and dangers that liberation would bring to local residents. I think that this is a key area that needs to be addressed by any kind of nonviolent resistance strategies today, because the cost of war really depends on the mental state, on the views, the perceptions, the beliefs of people involved, and not just of the military, obviously the military people, but also of the general population. So this is an area that needs a lot of attention. I have not been, due to my own travels and some other issues, I have been maybe less involved in activities for the last 2 months, but I'm right now back in Kiev, and hopefully I'll be able to, we will be able to resume our activities and to make a new assessment of the current state of nonviolent resistance in occupied territories and the current challenges, because it's also important to say that things are changing all the time. And, the research that Felipe has done in spring and beginning of the summer, showed one picture. The research that we did in August and September showed a different picture. And now in December, I'm sure we will see many, many new aspects of both the realities in occupied territories, concerns that people have there, and also new ideas and new opportunities related to various forms of nonviolent resistance. So hopefully we will have a chance to do another assessment of this in the coming weeks.
Thank you very much, Andre, for this great presentation on, first of all, the grave miscalculation that the political miscalculation that the Russian government has placed when they downplayed the way that the Ukrainian population would respond. But I would like just to stress 2 points that you raised that I think are very important. In our meetings with activists, there is something that was said that I think I will never forget, is that when they were in the front lines between the occupied territories, the temporarily occupied territories, and the territory still controlled by Ukraine, people would arrive and say, the first thing they would say is, don't forget about us. And how you mentioned that the humanitarian response is not simply giving food or giving medical aid to people. I think that is incredibly important for people to understand the level of chaos and the level of stress that those people were living in and trying to navigate, and how this the help coming from the Ukrainian side can help boost morale as well and remind people that they were not forgotten. And on the point on the education, on how this was both a major focus by the Kremlin in terms of indoctrination and in terms of cultural and political control, and how it was also an area that was met with very with a lot of resistance, with a lot of civil organized resistance by teachers. I think it's almost impossible not to draw the parallel with the non-cooperation movement in Norway during the Nazi occupation, and how the groups of Norwegian teachers managed to oppose Nazi indoctrinations in the school, and that's a case study taught worldwide as a major victory. And I think people will remember the case of the resistance of teachers in Ukraine in the same way. Now, I will give the floor then to our last panelist, and then we can open the floor for questions and answers. So our third panelist is Maria Levonova. She is the lead of an NGO based in Ukraine called the Center for United Action, but she is an analyst and she leads the analytical team of the organization and has extensive experience in developing analytical frameworks, both for advocacy, but also for campaigning. So, Maria, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me today. Do you hear me well?
We do, yes.
Great. Great. I will start a little bit from the beginning, how this all started. What we saw, what's happening on the ground is that first, local authorities were not prepared to humanitarian challenges and social challenges that appeared after the full-scale invasion. There was no coordination either on vertical level, no horizontal level, or this coordination was so weak and ineffective that it didn't make any impact on the effectiveness of the local campaign that appeared and happened. So there was a lot of chaos, and people were to organize it themselves. That is why the civil society response and nonviolent response was so high on all the territories of Ukraine, but I will speak more about the home front territories, because this is where we as an organization look more precisely on. Well, first, this happened at once. I mean, the response, it was very quick, it was very reactive. It was both on institutional level and non-institutional level. I mean that all institutionalized organizations working in different fields, they switched the mode into reacting on challenges that appeared because of the full-scale invasion. The same happened to the organization I represent. We work as an analytical and advocacy center, but we started to help people find safe homes on the more safe territories on the second day of the full-scale invasion. But also these were initiatives that had no previous experience of work in an organized way, in an institutional way. So these were not organizations, these were just like some unities of people who cared and who tried to do something in new conditions they found themselves. What we did as an organization, we worked for 5 months in the regime of like a center that was helping people find families that were ready to bring them into their households. So during 5 months of work, we helped like 5,500 people to stay somewhere, to find an overnight stay or find a temporary accommodation for free, both in private households and on a community level in community centers. We paid most attention to families traveling with children because it would be harder for them to stay on the floor in the school. We also paid more attention to people who were traveling with people with disabilities, because also they needed some better space to stay. And also families who traveled with animals, because it was just impossible to find a place with animals in some communal and local governance organized center for IDPs. That is why we had so much communication with local communities, and we understood that they trusted much more NGOs and volunteers than they trusted national authorities. This is a long tradition of Ukraine. And also they could communicate with us more freely and more fairly. The same thing happened about international organizations that were trying to reach out to them, as far as they had no previous experience of cooperation with international organizations and structures. They tend to ask us for support and to moderate the discussions, for example, or they try to avoid these types of cooperation just in case, as they call it. That is why Ukrainian NGOs that were institutionalized naturally become the closest partners to local authorities who were to solve the most of the problems on the ground. And that is why national NGOs and institutionalized NGOs have currently the most of the information about the real situation on the ground and about what is happening with nonviolent resistance especially. Why they were so open and the cooperation was effective. First, as for my organization, we had a lot of previous experience of working with local communities, of course, not on issues of like humanitarian response, but still we understood the way they communicate, we understood how to talk to them. and we were open to listen. We gathered really a lot of information through preparing our podcast hand in hand. We talked there about very small and grassroots initiatives in local communities of different like size and level of development, of how ordinary people organize to do something in response to war challenges. We now have like up to 200 interviews, and we're going to have analytical research on it. We're in the process of preparing it, but what we see is that they still exist. This is the first important thing, that in homefront communities, there are still like local initiatives that do something in response to humanitarian challenges or war challenges. They of course change if you compare if the community was, for example, occupied or heavily shelled. The types of interactions and the products they do and services they provide differ a lot, and also they differ a lot in time. So they are the most reactive to the changing of situation. If you, for example, compare these super local initiatives to bigger organizations or international organizations working with humanitarian response, the smallest one are the fastest to react and know the needs the best. So they do not pay any attention to things that were relevant yesterday. They just like stop doing that and go on reacting on the situation really fast. What we have now, we have now that people still move. There's still a lot of challenges. People already who are like trying to deal with these challenges, they learned how to. So they are more resilient to stress situations. Of course, it's not getting easier with time, but still people learned how to deal with it in a better way, in a better manner. The winter is going to be a big challenge. It is already here, and especially in terms of what Russia is doing by shelling the infrastructure of Ukraine. Up to 50% of Ukraine's energy infrastructure is heavily damaged. Last week in my apartment, I had like up to 50 hours without electricity, heating, internet connection, and water. Well, I went through this, and people are looking at this from the perspective, well, we will see what will happen next and how long we will be able to live in it. But on the ground, we do not see the tendency of leaving again, right? Because like many people who left in the first days of the war, those who came back, they really do not want to escape their homes once more. So it seems that it's going to be more and more activities related to organizing some spaces for going through the winter. The thing is that the presidential campaign of creating those unbreakability places is to be implemented by local self-government. It seems like local self-government doesn't have neither enough of resources nor enough of capacity to organize. So what we see now that the most reactive and the most fast are local businesses and people themselves. So it seems like that again in this part of the challenges and in this period, these will be grassroots initiatives leading the process once more. In some cities, like in Lviv, for example, the mayor launched some support campaign for businesses that provide access to internet connection and electricity for people for free, and they're going to compensate for generators or something. But it is like the only case I've heard about when local authorities understand that local business is covering what they are supposed to cover normally. Why people rely on themselves? Well, because we are going through this war since February already, and what we see is that grassroots initiatives were mostly led not by local officials, but by ordinary people. It mustn't be even like people who worked in NGOs. It mustn't be even people who worked in business, but these were people from different areas who had some organizational capacity and readiness to do something. So it's all built on the energy and on a belief that something must be done. And also, it's also built on something that you understand that nobody else takes care about it, right? If you look up to local community authorities and they do nothing, then you just start doing it yourself because you see people in the street that who need to eat and who need to sleep somewhere. So we just react on what you see. From what we see as well as information about what is happening on a state level and on local level with public money is closed mostly. Well, in Ukraine, we have one of the most progressive legislations on access to public information in the world. It was advocated for during Yanukovych times, and it was like a huge victory of civil society. And nowadays, in times of war, authorities are closing this information. So we do not even know how much money is going for like some extra support for the war reasons. It makes sense from the perspective of local authorities who have much more bureaucratic work to do these days, and that is why they cannot like process all the requests. But still, it's like something we deal with from civil society when we do not understand where is the money and what kind of money is supposed to be there, so that we can rely on it in some period of time. What we also see that there is still no coordination. We would say that something changed rapidly since February, for example. Communities still do not coordinate between one another on who is like covering what, and whether some like neighboring community could support another community like dealing with some particular issue. So it still doesn't work properly. The IDP issues are put totally on local self-governments and mostly on grassroots initiatives. So the government just like said, okay, you deal with it now. Another thing is that the government program on rebuilding the houses, which were ruined or damaged because of the Russian aggression, is also put on local self-governance. So the general frame is that the government will pay for it, but the procedure is not clear, and the responsibility is on the local self-government. Legislation is in place since August this year. And it hasn't, we haven't seen any like signs that it is being implemented. And we see that even more, we see that sometimes there are some small, like, for example, a female initiative of women and girls rebuilding houses near Kyiv. This is what we see like in our social media, but we do not see like the government efforts to deal with it somehow. So it means that we are like not rebuilding in the process, right? Of course, the government is trying to rebuild the most critical things like bring electricity back to the occupied territories, to repair the electricity infrastructure after the heavy shellings. This, I must admit, is like really done very quickly and very fast to avoid a critical humanitarian problem. But still, there are issues that are like being put for later, and we do not understand for how long it's going to be put for later, and whether there is like a sign of trying to solve it. So grassroots initiatives are going to be again a better response for this. Another two things I would like to mention from the perspective of what new is going on is that first, culture and identity resistance, they were mentioned today. I would say that more and more initiatives are being created since February, and we see like a huge flow of information about, for example, Christmas nowadays, about changing the dates of official celebration and about moving to another calendar. And these campaigns are so massive compared to previous years. And this is just one example of what is going on to talk to Ukrainians and to explain Ukrainians how much they differ from Russians, right? So this is a big part of work that is being done by many organizations. And it's not about even organizations who work with cultural issues. It's about every organization that wants, right? It's also about local business. It's about like organizations that like media organizations, like about everyone who has to say something. They are willing to tell something about our identity, and open really many projects about it. Another thing that is in place is Russian propaganda. It is still there. Luckily they do it worse, and that is why it's so obvious and clear that these are like propaganda messages. It's like much less prepared than it was in first months of an invasion. What we faced then was that, for example, when we were helping people to move to more safe communities and find homes there, we found like messages on super local Facebook pages of like very small groups in small villages saying bad stories about IDPs who came and ruined houses and were speaking Russian. And they were repeating like from region to region and from community to the community. It was much harder for local residents to understand and to feel the difference between the truth and the propaganda. So compared to that period, nowadays they are working in like faster, and they are doing it worse, and they're making so many obvious mistakes that it is easier for us, like, because the people just learn how to differ and just not like keep up to these messages anymore. Speaking about the future and our democracy, I managed about what is going on with energy infrastructure. We will see more and more movements on the ground related to this, and people are organizing their lives around it. Local business investors initiatives are responding to the challenges and will be responding to the challenges in the future. What we see that first, these new forms of cooperation that appeared and the people tried to practice are totally new for Ukrainian post-Soviet society. Business and NGOs and people like working at schools and in local self-governance and just like youth never tried to cooperate on anything. That is why it's a very unique situation when all around the country we have this like very small initiatives of many people engaged into doing something good for the country. So it is like the new civil society is about to emerge, and we do hope that this energy and this experience will be brought to after war times. And we think that it will influence the political landscape of the country. It will influence a lot the expectations of the society towards the authorities on different levels. Of course, we understand that these people will be used in upcoming elections. It will be normal, but still we would do think that the mode they will answer with, and if they answer, will be totally different. We nowadays see that people who are leaders of the largest volunteer campaigns in Ukraine, the volunteer foundations, they are really high in the ratings, like as people who are like trusted in the country. So we do think that at least one of them will be working on a political party, and we do hope that these people on the ground will be highly engaged and motivated to enter the politics. Another thing is what is interesting, that in the last sociology I've seen, it was like national survey performed in April. We are expecting another one of late November to be published soon. But it says that the anti-corruption mood and the issue of corruption is almost on the same level of importance as the security issues now. So it is interesting because since February, the difference was huge, right? The security issue was on the first place, and it was like very important for like the majority of the society. And now we see them getting a bit lower, but the anti-corruption mood are getting like as high as the issues of security, which is also interesting because we will see. I hope we will see like another approach to talking to local authorities and monitoring their work. What else? Decentralization will continue, especially in terms of what I said about local communities dealing with most of the problems. There will be a risk that national authorities will continue to put something on the local authorities' responsibility and try to take all the like good things that happened on their like rating results. But still, we do think that decentralization reforms will keep moving on, and more will be happening on the ground. New people, and we think that much more women will go to politics in next rounds. We were supposed to have parliamentary elections next year. We think that they will not happen because of the war that we have now. Well, of course, something may change, and especially in Ukraine, you can have a situation and the election can happen next year, but still it's like we're almost sure that it will not be like that. So the elections will be moved to 2024 when we will have presidential elections all together with parliamentary elections. So this will be the period when we will have to structurize the society to come down a bit and understand like how the landscape changes. But we do expect more new people and women to be participating in political life. A helping energy, and there's the common trauma of people who went through occupation and the people who went through like understanding what Russians did to civilians during this war is something that will forever change Ukrainians' understanding of Russia as a neighbor, right? This approach really influenced everything that we had in the country. South and East was supporting pro-Russian direction a lot, but what we also see that it will change forever because of the experience that these people went through, but also we have our security services working in Moskovsky Patriarchat churches these days. They come to like Lavra and other monasteries in the country, which were under Russian control, and they find a lot of propaganda materials, a lot of pro-Russian literature, which was like obvious that, you know, under this umbrella of protection of religious rights of the people, Russia did their propaganda work all around the country. And we are really like happy that our security services at last started working on it, and they seem to do it really effectively and pretty fast. So together with the experience that these people went through and saw in their eyes and lost their like relatives and close people, and in this disgusting manner that they did it, and together with like taking Russian propaganda from the churches, and the level of influence of Moscow church was huge on people's minds, and we saw it every time in sociology. So we do think that it will change the way the south of Ukraine and the east of Ukraine and will live, and what will be in their heads, and it will change a lot our society as well. And it will, of course, change the political discussion, because we do hope that there will be no issues like, is there any direction towards Russia anymore? Speaking about the media coverage, it is important that first we still have the marathon, the media marathon, which is central. So national channels do not have the capacity to like work normally. Unfortunately, this is something that is not okay, and we are talking about it a lot in civil society, that it is already time to come back to free media in Ukraine and give the air to different channels. Another thing is that it is also very important to be very careful about speaking about initiatives on the occupied territories, because the more we speak about it and less careful we are, the more vulnerable are people who are working on it, right? From the beginning of the war, we had information that up to 90% of information that Russia gets from the fields, they get it from open sources. That is why there was a lot of campaigning in Ukraine since that moment about how much information we can put on like social media and how much information we should filter. And it is like ongoing. Every time we have challenge, every time there are messages from the authorities and from NGOs and from media that please be careful what you share. So that is why I think it will be much more information after this war ends, and after we win, we will understand more what was going on. Like the yellow ribbon, we will get more and more stories like that. But the thing is that nowadays it's not time to talk about them yet, just to make sure that people working on it are safe and will be able to continue their work. That is all I wanted to share with you today, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Maria, thank you so much for your intervention. Really, I took 2 pages of notes, and it's hard for me even to give a breath with the same power and the same strength of what you gave. But I think you spoke so clearly about the different ways of cooperation between different kinds of institutions and different bodies in Ukraine right now, and the list of challenges. So the impacts to infrastructure, the issues with IDPs, the classical question on the centralization, so the tensions between the national authorities and the local communities, and how organizations and grassroots organizations work in the middle. Amazing. I'm just going to stop talking now. I will open the floor for questions. So whoever feels to open their mic and ask a question, please feel free. Otherwise, we'll also monitor the chat in case you're not comfortable or cannot speak right now. Okay, it sounds like we don't have any hands up for now, but Maybe I can start to break the ice. Maria, you mentioned that the issue of corruption has now been raising in the similar level of the security issues right now. Something that I've heard, and I've had conversations about this with our partners in Ukraine, is the concerns regarding the issues with people that are considered collaborators or people who have engaged in corruption activities with humanitarian aid and others. So I was wondering if the speakers would have some input on how is the legal framework right now in Ukraine, and how for those who are considered collaborators and for corruption issues, and how do you see those tensions coming up in the future?
I'm not ready to respond on the legal framework, but I know what is happening from the civil society side. For example, there is just a movement that they have the so-called, they create a base of collaborators from occupied territories, like putting their people which openly collaborated, like if we talk about Kherson, there were politicians like ex-mayor of Kherson who was like open collaborator. So what they do is they collect the information about the collaborators on the occupied territories, and they check the information about them before they publish their names. And they cooperate a lot with security services, so they just provide them with information about which they get, right? Because like it's like maybe easier for them as for NGO, which is like well known and trusted, to collect some of the information. Speaking about the work with those who were stealing the humanitarian aid, there were cases, and we are happy that they were like public, right? Because like people are donating so much money these days. Like we had like the previous shelling Ukrainians went through, there was like up to 100 bombs over the country, and Ukrainians collected $5.5 million within the day. And it is like not international donations, right? And it's like a penny for a budget of the state for security issues, but it is a lot for people and who live in the society with up to 70% under the poverty line. Of course, this is the government data, and it doesn't cover the gray economy that we have. But still, even if it's 40% of people under the poverty line, that's a lot. And people bring this money to the army and to the volunteers that buy some weapons, right? So I would say that this hasn't influenced the level of support of the volunteer initiatives. And also there are so many private initiatives collecting money for some particular people in the army that are not like super public, because they are really like small gatherings, but they happen all the time in every person's like a smaller community and friends and families. And of course, it's good that it's being done by the state, but it is also good that Ukrainians are like, well, okay, it must have happened one day. We must have had these issues because we are all people, but we will still continue donating. So I would say that it's really good that it hasn't stopped the willingness of Ukrainians to support what the state cannot cover itself.
Hello, good day.
Thank you very much, Maria. I wonder if Felipe or Andre would like to chip in that question as well. No? Okay. We have a hand up. Please, Wilson. You can speak.
You get me?
No, I'm afraid I'm not getting you very clearly. But I can also read your question in the chat if it's the same one.
Yes, I have a question. I don't know. I don't know if you guys are getting. Yes, it's really a devastating issue, especially to us, the African community in both Europe and Africa, concerning the war in Ukraine. This has really put us in a very tight corner. And I really want to ask this question, which I wrote on the chat. We know that, I don't know how to put it, but then I know of so many organizations that works from Europe and America back to Africa, there are partners who are willing to work when it comes to assisting Africans, the IDPs and the refugees back here in Africa. But why is it that whenever the Africans want to assist or want to send a humanitarian hand to these European organizations in Europe, just like to help or to volunteer what is happening in Ukraine, the Europeans and the Americans don't allow the Africans to partake in this humanitarian process when it comes in? That's my first question. And the second question is, why is it always difficult for Africans to volunteer for the humanitarian organizations in Europe and in America, especially what is happening in Ukraine? Is it that it's very difficult? Is it that it's very difficult for the European to take Africans to help in the, or the Africans that they cannot give something good or a good aid to the Europeans? I don't know, because this thing has really pondered my mind, because I quite remember so many instances I've been wanting to, not just me, but others to assist in this process. But it's very difficult to see a European organization taking someone from Africa to assist these people. So we don't know how our own assistance can be classified in Africa. I'm talking based on African perspective. I'm sorry about that. Yes. So that's just the issue that I want to know. Because I believe there are many ways, even when the crisis began in Ukraine, even when the crisis began in Ukraine, the Ukrainian, I believe the Ukrainian embassy opens their door for nations wide to join the military, to assist them, the Russian. But from then till date, nothing has been said about that. I also remember other organizations that were opening their doors for the world to apply and assist or volunteer with them. But then still yet no feedback, no positive feedback was ever given to the Africans who are willing to spread a humanitarian gesture out of the African continent. So please, I don't know if you can answer that question, and it will really be so helpful to me and maybe the African community as a whole. Thank you very much. And we'll see about the days in Cameroon.
Thank you very much, Wilson. Would any of the speakers would like to take that question?
Yeah, I can say some words, because, well, thank you, Wilson, for your comment. I think that so my experience now also, like working in Ukraine, also participating in other in international conference, I think that I observed that there is also like a very limited participation of, for example, Latin American and African organizations in this type of context. We are talking about international conference, but we see that there is a lack of participation of African organizations, Latin American organizations. I think that we need to also cover this gap. I think that we need to increase solidarity relations with activists, nonviolent activists and organizations with huge experience, like in African organizations or Latin American organizations. I know that some of my colleagues in Ukraine, they are working with Iraqi groups or Iraqi organizations. They have important experience on peace building and humanitarian aid. I know that there are Iraqi and also Syrian experts working in the country already, but I think we need to reinforce the cooperation with African organizations and Latin American groups. Why? I think that, for example, if you look also how the Russian propaganda is operating, they also focus a lot on African countries. We have also the work of Wagner Group operating in Central African Republic. So they knew the importance, to basically to gain the minds of the African people. So I think that in terms of, as Maria was mentioning, very illustrated very well, the importance of the power of the people, from local level. We need to create this type of cooperation with local organizations, local groups from different parts of the world. So I don't have an answer. I think that is important. So I think that the key point will be how we can, create these channels of cooperation, because for me, I think are essential. Yes.
Thank you, Philippe. I see another question in the chat.
Yes, I still have something to say about that. Just like what Philippe said. Are you getting me?
Yes, please, go on.
Ask this question.
Sorry, Wilson, now I cannot hear you anymore.
You getting me?
No, not really.
You get-
You're coming in and out.
Oh, are you getting me? All what we Africans want is a hand of solidarity, just as Felipe said. Ukraine should extend their hands, or Africans should also extend their hands to the European Union to assist each other. You know, the Russians are more powerful, or might be more powerful. I'm sorry to use this statement in quote. It's because Russians extend their hands to the Africans. They embrace. Look at what is happening in Mali. Look at what is happening to the other African countries, which the Russian has invaded, or the Russians are taking control over in the place of the French. You see that the solidarity is there. At times, the Africans feel that there is a kind of racism, in quote, let me put that, which Africans cannot give, which Africans cannot really give. And I'm very happy for what Felipe said. That has really moved me. It makes me to feel like I belong to the right webinar, which we can talk some of these issues and see how we can create ties that will last for so long, long-lasting ties, to increase our hands of friendship for this. Thank you again, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that replica. If you agree, I'll start reading the questions in the chat. So I have one from Andrei. Have you assessed the work of the National Resistance Center in Ukraine? How effective has it been in organizing and mobilizing nonviolent resistance movement? Would any of the speakers would like to take that on? And he continues, also, I'd like to ask if you know about national or international actors supporting people on temporarily occupied territories to engage in unarmed civilian-based defense.
Yeah, I don't know if Andre wants to answer one of the two questions. And
I can say a few words. First of all, to be honest, I don't have a overview of the different activities of various national institutions. But from what I know, that I think that there has been most of the activities that took place were happening without a good, let's say, professional background to them. The Nonviolent Resistance Center, the Total Resistance, the National Resistance Center in Ukraine. It's a good example. If you look at their website, they speak about all kinds of forms of resistance, including definitely nonviolent resistance. The problem is that different forms of resistance have different, they can be effective in different ways. They have different, there are different conditions that need to be considered when thinking of different forms of resistance. When you open their website, you see, for example, a list of Gene Sharp's 198 methods of nonviolent resistance, and right next to it, you see the next part is how to destroy enemy tank, or how to disable enemy tank, and things like that. So see that for nonviolent resistance to be effective, the people involved in it need to understand that you can't mix it with something else. And in the examples of nonviolent resistance that we know about, one of the things that the leaders of an effective nonviolent resistance campaign did is they spent quite a bit of time controlling the people on their side to prevent any moves like toward the Russian military that could be seen as provocative and could then lead to a violent response. And that was one of the key things. So I think that something was lacking is this understanding of that you can't they're in the war like this. You have all kinds of forms of resistance, armed resistance, sabotage, various forms of nonviolent resistance, intelligence gathering and so forth. Everything is happening. But nonviolent resistance is, it has to be treated as a separate and very important aspect of this resistance. And people involved in nonviolent resistance need to understand the rules. Overall, that did happen. Overall, people involved in nonviolent protests did, just based on common sense and understanding the situation, usually were able to keep themselves and other people, separate from other types of, from the military, from other types of resistance that happened. But I think that there needs to be more and better understanding of, the specific aspects and the specific benefits of nonviolent resistance and such, and why you can't mix it. Also, you're sending the, when you set up a website like that, you're sending a message to your enemy as well. When they see, disabling a tank, nonviolent resistance, then, acts of sabotage and this and that, in one line, then they see nonviolent resistance as just one, basically the same as many other forms of resistance, and they react to it in the same way. So, I see another message here about was there any previous activities prior to the war, any preparations for nonviolent resistance? I don't know, maybe on a local level, some places there were, but I don't know about that. I personally tried to raise the aspect of nonviolent resistance with some officials in the weeks coming to the war, but I don't think that the Ukrainian government really recognized the importance and value of nonviolent preparing for nonviolent resistance prior to the war. Maybe also there was a misconception that if you start focusing on nonviolent resistance, that might somehow weaken the ability of society to turn to armed resistance. I don't know, but unfortunately I don't know of any campaign and prior to the war specifically focused on preparing Ukrainian society for nonviolent resistance against Russian aggression. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know that. Maybe some of the other speakers would like to
add a little bit on the preparation side. I totally agree with you, Andrew, because from what we saw, nothing was prepared in advance, neither from the national authority side. I mean, speaking about the humanitarian side of the things, not from local authority side, not from NGOs. Like, the thing was that before this full-scale invasion, there were several months of talking about this may happen, but after some time you just cannot think about it, right? You just continue doing what you do. That is why a lot of civil society organizations and like even humanitarian organizations, they were just continuing dealing with the issues they were dealing with normally. And of course, we had some kind of a plan B. We understood that if a full-scale invasion happens, we will help somehow authorities. It was obvious, right? We could not like keep on monitoring and criticizing national decision makers in the state of war, but we could not understand where directly our support will be needed. For example, we were in a stage of a cooperation with Ministry of Economy and Ministry of Education, but when the full-scale invasion started, we understood that this project will not move on, and this support from our side is not needed at this moment. So we understood that we will pay more attention to support of local authorities with what they face with IDP movement and loads of people traveling, like leaving the very dangerous territories. But also, I would like to emphasize that nonviolent resistance is not something that is instead of military resistance of Ukraine. And it is really important to keep it in mind every time we speak about it, because nonviolent resistance is only possible because we keep working on a military side. And unfortunately, we hear like messages that, well, maybe there is like some peaceful way of talking. This is not something that is real in Ukraine at this moment, and we understand it from the way Russians behave on the battlefield, right? And the way they behave in this cruel war. So I see I've seen the message in the meeting chat, and I thank you for raising it, because I'm not getting tired of repeating that these are things that do not cannot one cannot be instead of another one in Ukraine, unfortunately.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much, Maria. Felipe, please.
Yeah, I would like to add that. Yeah, I think well, I agree with you and Andrea and Maria, and I think that this is one of the key dilemmas, no, that we need to confront about when we talk about non-violence resistance. And I think that this asymmetry of power and the aggression that is happening. So just I would like to add that the topic of I think that it's true that there was not a national coordination, but there was also this massive action, and this massive action will need to be understood also in terms of the evolution of the civil society and the local activism in the country. You know, the different evolution processes that happen. You know, from the Granite Revolution to Maidan. Self-organized groups in the country. I think also we need to pay attention to the partisans' presence in the country, in the north and the south of the country. And for example, the sabotage actions in the occupied areas, it was also the result of this partisan tradition. And I think that in terms of, you know, non-violence action, sabotage is considered as a non-violent action. This is one of the methods defined by Jane Sharp. The question is that what is the balance between the action, the goal of the action, and the harm, you know, to human lives, no? But this is also some other, you know, discussions we can have in other moments. It's another dilemma. I think that every society defines what are the limits of violence in every concrete moment, and I think this is in the middle of the war. I think that the Ukrainian society is also defining their own, you know, concept of resistance. There is also a comment regarding the unarmed civilian-based defense. I mean, of course, there are international organizations supporting this process, and I would like also to follow what Maria was mentioned, also to have also to protect also the activists on the ground. But I would just to highlight one international ongoing action that is organized by the World Beyond War. I don't know if I can. Yes, in this is one international proposals to create an armed civilian, let's say, action to, let's say, to create to demilitarize the nuclear plant of Zaporizhia. So there is already ongoing discussions with the International Agency of Atomic Energy to try to protect the UN investigators in this plan through a civilian base mission. Of course, this needs also to engage with the Russian side to have a protection to enter and to monitor and to protect this area and to demilitarize this nuclear plant. This is one of the samples about this international support, and is public, and you can see also the evolution of the news about this proposal. Yeah.
Andre, would you like to add to that? I see your mic is open.
Yeah. You mean regarding the proposal on the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant? I don't know. To be honest, I'm quite skeptical. And if a decision is made, it will be made by the political leaderships based on military and political considerations. This is not something that will be, the decision will not be significantly influenced by civil activities, be it international or whatever. I mean, that's just the reality. If that's what you wanted me to comment on.
Thank you. I see another question in the chat. I believe I would direct it in particular to Maria and Andre, but Philippe, please feel free to chip in. What kinds of nonviolent solidarity action in Western Europe, Germany, do nonviolent actors in Ukraine want to support the nonviolent resistance in Ukraine morally and to mobilize public support for nonviolent struggle against the politically massively advocated military option?
Well, I can start by saying that one simple thing that is very important for people is the recognition. People who are in occupied territories is to be recognized. If, for example, people on the high political level, leaders of European states, among other things, mention samples of nonviolent resistance, specific samples that happen here or there. Of course, we need to think carefully. This probably should be related to things that happened a while ago, not to put anyone in jeopardy. That's the number one case. But if nonviolent resistance is mentioned on a high political level more often, that in itself would be a very important encouragement to people in these areas. And another practical thing is the need, and maybe what, I don't know about civil side, but what Western countries could do is provide some assistance to relevant institutions in Ukraine in developing policies that would take into consideration the realities that people face in these territories. For example, when we spoke with teachers and educators from occupied territories, we were given a few examples of cases where, either the Ministry of Education and Science or maybe the local, the regional branch of educational science in one of the Ukrainian regions that was under almost complete occupation at the time, would come up with certain instructions to people from who left this region that simply were irrelevant. They didn't take into consideration the reality that people face, that you have to all register in a certain place. Well, people leave in different directions. So obviously, what would be good if in different branches of the Ukrainian government, there could be a specialist with a consultative status or something like that on a temporary basis, but during this period, that could basically provide some input and help looking at different documents, different materials, different orders or instructions that are produced that would have a good understanding of the realities of what people are facing in occupied territories, and could, simply point out and say, look, this and this and this is not feasible, or, this might put people in greater danger. We can't do this, something like that. So in that sense, that's something that I think European or international community could support. And also, if there are specialists with similar experiences in other countries, then maybe some kind of experience or change in that area in this field could be useful.
Thank you, Andre. And maybe we can take only one more. I see one here from Bob. How do you assess the use of social media channels for the providing information about nonviolent resistance? I have seen many YouTubers who have started to report and comment, give information on developments in Ukraine and also in Russia.
Well, I can say that, it is, and people might say this contradicts what I just said before that. But, there are two considerations. One is that it's very important to know about nonviolent resistance. And today, many people are getting information from YouTube and other internet services. But of course, it would be good if this information could also be shared on more formal media channels, national TV or whatever. But also, we also need to think of the do no harm principle. And we have just recently run into a situation where a film was created about cases of nonviolent resistance in certain location. This location is still under occupation, and people from there asked not to widely broadcast this film today because of, they have fears of that this might create certain repercussions from the occupiers. So that's something that we also need to consider.
I see. Do you think the information available on social media right now is reliable on the nonviolent resistance?
Well, I don't know, that there's so much. I don't know. I don't have a complete picture. So I'm sure there's a lot of information that is real and a lot of that is not. Unfortunately, it's very hard to tell. I don't have, maybe if there could be some kind of center that would really have the capacity to do research on different cases of nonviolent resistance and so forth. Right now, I don't think anyone could say, we get lots of information. In wartime, one thing that people need to know that in times of war, I would say that most information about development needs to be initially considered questionable. I would say, because I would say that the amount of false information during military conflicts is much greater than the amount of true information, or information gets distorted in certain ways. So we just need to be very, very cautious about any information that we get and that is being spread, and we need to always try to double check and so forth. Not run, the media wants sensational news. That's not the right thing for society.
I add to this a little bit from on the grassroots level. Social media is probably the only channel of information where you can get anything on what's going on with this nonviolence resistance. But it also covers like a very small part of what is happening in reality. Because first, those who organize the processes and those who like implement the processes, they do not believe that like all the information is something that is useful for somebody else, right? So like they publish something where they want to say thank you somebody for bringing some humanitarian aid, or they publish something that say like, okay, like today we managed to help this many people, but most interesting things and most valuable facts are never published, just because people who do them, they never worked in like in NGOs even, right? So they consider it something that it is not important to share. And that is why there are many things that we can get only through direct communication. Like, so for example, we gathered like 200 interviews, and now we understand that, okay, they publish like 1% of it on social media even. And yeah, I totally agree that everything must be checked a million times, because especially like the way Russian propaganda works, we also see that I mentioned some messages appearing on the ground and were really hard to like differ. And I understand that if it's for Ukrainian people living in Ukraine or Ukrainians, it's easier because you can, if you can compare what's going on the ground, you can like filter this information. But for people from outside the country, it's much harder because they are out of the context and they cannot like read the messages that are clearly not from the ground. And like even in names of the villages and towns, for example, there are mistakes sometimes. That's why it's important to double check.
Thank you very much, Maria. So I wonder if any of the speakers would like to do a closing statement, or in case we can just finish for today.
Well, also, think to say about
Wilson, unfortunately, I cannot hear you properly. You're coming in and out again.
You get me now?
Can you please try again?
What I'm saying is, social media is not the best for me because
I'm sorry, but we cannot understand. If you have another question, would you like to write it in the chat?
Yeah, I can say something. While here Wilson is writing, I think that regarding the question about, well, how we can do, for Wednesday Europe as well. I think that I agree with Andrea about the question of recognition and also to increase the support to nonviolent resistance. But at the same time, I think that we need to be aware that our governments are also trying to use the war in Ukraine as a shock to increase military budgets. I think that if we take a look in the military budgets in Spain, Germany, and the increasing budget in a post-pandemic era, I think that is something we need to pay attention. For example, in the case of Spain, we have 25% of the budget has been increased in the Ministry of Defense. So how much amount is going to go for weapons for Ukraine? Maybe 0.5% maximum. So the rest is going to be to militarize our societies. So I think that the nonviolent activists, we need also to engage in the concept of security. We need to discuss. I'm not against, to discuss about the sending of weapons, or the support to Ukraine. But I think that we need to engage in the debate about security and about the debate about military expenditures in our societies. So we need to create a new architecture of security also in Europe, because this neighbor Russia is going to still be there. So we need to find ways, to engage in a more, let's say, effective ways to reduce these threats in the future. So I think that this is very important also to advocate to our policymakers and political leaders and to engage in this concept of security from the human security perspective. I think this is also one of our responsibilities, apart from supporting, of course, the Ukrainian society and activists. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Felipe. I think this point is incredibly important. And I can read now, it's a comment by Wilson. People around my continent believe that most information on social media is not true. So I will suggest Ukraine go into ties its foreign policies. Thank you for your comment. I think we had a very productive discussion today. I felt honored to moderate this discussion with such amazing practitioners and scholars. And yes, I hope to welcome you soon for a new discussion on the topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye-bye.